For 9 years, Caleb Rutherford woke up every morning unsure what version of his body he would be given. Some days he could stand at the bathroom sink and shave without his hands shaking. Other days, the razor rattled so hard against the porcelain that he had to sit on the edge of the tub and wait for the room to stop tilting. He learned to tell the difference within seconds of opening his eyes. It was a quiet skill. A private one. From the outside, no one would have guessed anything was wrong. Caleb was still listed as the founder and principal investor of Rutherford Holdings. His name still appeared in trade magazines. His suits were still custom. His house, set back from the road behind iron gates and old maple trees, still whispered money in every polished surface and soft footstep. But wealth didn't stop the headaches. They came like pressure, as if someone were slowly inflating a balloon behind his eyes. Light sharpened. Sounds blurred together. Even the hum of the refrigerator downstairs could feel intrusive on bad days, a low vibration that crawled up his spine. Doctors had names for everything except what he had. Chronic fatigue, they said. Stress response. Age-related changes. One urologist leaned back in a leather chair and asked carefully if Caleb had considered therapy. Caleb didn't raise his voice. He never did. He simply nodded, thanked the man for his time, and never returned. At first, he fought the uncertainty with the same discipline that had built his empire. Early mornings. Supplements arranged in neat rows. Trainers. Nutritionists. Sleep trackers strapped to his wrist like silent witnesses. When that failed, he fought harder. Private clinics. Second opinions. Specialists flown in from cities he used to visit weekly for work. Each new appointment came with a flicker of hope, followed by the same flat ending. Tests that landed just inside the acceptable range. Scans that showed nothing urgent. Blood work that shrugged back at him. Eventually, even hope became exhausting. Caleb stopped flying. Airports made the dizziness worse. The press of people, the echoing announcements, the way the floor seemed to tilt as he walked long-term analysing down corridors, it all took too much effort to manage politely. Board meetings shifted to video calls. Then to summaries emailed by assistants. Then to polite updates that no longer asked for his input. His world narrowed to the mansion. It was quiet there. Too quiet sometimes. The kind of quiet that made you aware of your own breathing, your own pulse, the soft creak of the house settling at night. Caleb learned the sounds the way sailors learn the sea. Which floorboard complained. Which pipe knocked twice before warming up. Which rooms felt colder even in summer. He spent most mornings in his bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, waiting for the dizziness to pass before standing. Sunlight filtered through heavy curtains, dust drifting lazily in the air. Some days he watched it move and wondered how something so small could feel so heavy. He didn't like people in that room. It wasn't superstition. It wasn't secrecy. It was simply the one place where he felt exposed. The place where his body betrayed him most often. Where the weakness had nowhere to hide behind schedules or staff or polished smiles. So he set rules. The bedroom was cleaned but not rearranged. Vacuumed but not touched beyond what was necessary. Nothing moved. Nothing questioned. Most people accepted that without thinking. And that, more than anything, made Caleb uneasy. Because whatever was happening to him didn't feel random. It felt patient. Slow. As if it were waiting. Some nights, lying awake with the ache behind his eyes and the faint metallic taste creeping up his throat, he wondered if this was what losing control actually felt like. Not dramatic. Not sudden. Just a steady erosion day after day while the world kept calling you lucky. If this story already has you curious, stick with it. Some details matter more than they seem at first. And if you're the kind of listener who notices the small things, you might want to stay close for what comes next. People like you usually do. Caleb turned onto his side and stared at the floor, listening to the quiet hum beneath the house. He didn't know why his chest tightened then. He only knew the feeling had been growing stronger lately. Something in that room was wrong. And it had been there longer than he wanted to admit. By the third year, Caleb stopped counting doctors by name and started counting them by disappointment. There was the cardiologist who spoke slowly, as if volume might substitute for certainty. The endocrinologist who tapped a pen against a clipboard and said, "Everything looks acceptable," like that should have been comforting. The neurologist who ordered another scan and then another, each one more expensive and more inconclusive than the last. Caleb learned how to read faces before words came out. A slight narrowing of the eyes meant uncertainty. A forced smile meant reassurance without substance. When someone leaned back too far in their chair, it usually meant they were done trying. "You're under a tremendous amount of pressure," one physician said during a late afternoon appointment. Outside the window, traffic crawled along Lakeshore Drive, horns muffled by thick glass. "The body reacts in ways we don't always fully understand." Caleb nodded, hands folded in his lap. Pressure had never confused him before. Pressure was deadlines. Pressure was negotiations. Pressure was flying to 3 cities in 2 days and still making the closing dinner. This was different. This felt internal, invasive, personal. "What about the tremors?" Caleb asked. "The taste in my mouth? The way my vision blurs when I stand?" The doctor shrugged lightly. "Could be anxiety. Could be dehydration. Your labs don't indicate anything acute." Acute. That word followed him home like a ghost. There were weeks when Caleb convinced himself he was improving. He would wake without pain, make it through breakfast, even walk the grounds of the property without stopping to catch his breath. On those days he'd almost believe the doctors were right, that this was stress unraveling itself slowly. Then the symptoms would return without warning. One morning he dropped a coffee mug in the kitchen. It shattered at his feet, ceramic skidding across the marble. He stared down at the mess, embarrassed by how long it took him to bend and clean it up. His hand wouldn't steady. Another time, during a video call with the interim board, his words slurred slightly. Just enough for someone to pause and ask if he was feeling all right. "I'm fine," Caleb said quickly. He ended the call minutes later, heart pounding. After that, the invitations slowed. People stopped asking how he was doing and started asking when he planned to step back. Just temporarily. Just until he felt better. Caleb agreed because arguing took too much energy. At night, he lay awake replaying conversations with doctors, wondering if he'd described the symptoms correctly, if he'd minimized something important, if he'd missed the one detail that would have unlocked the answer. He kept a notebook on the bedside table for a while. Dates, symptoms, foods eaten, hours slept, patterns he hoped would reveal themselves if he looked long enough. They never did. Instead, new sensations appeared. A buzzing under the skin of his arms. A heaviness in his chest that came and went. A dull ache in his joints that no painkiller seemed to touch. One specialist suggested a psychosomatic component again. This time Caleb laughed. Not loudly. Just a short, dry sound that surprised them both. "I built my career on risk assessment," he said. "If this were in my head, I'd know." The doctor didn't argue. He simply wrote a referral for counseling and slid it across the desk. That was the moment something inside Caleb shifted. He stopped expecting answers. He still went to appointments. Still followed instructions. But the part of him that believed someone would fix this quietly shut the door. The mansion became his controlled environment. He monitored what came in. Food deliveries. Cleaning supplies. Air filters changed on schedule. Everything was accounted for. Everything except his own body. On especially bad nights, he paced the hallway outside his bedroom, barefoot on cool wood floors, listening to the house breathe. The walls held heat from the day. The vents whispered softly. Somewhere beneath it all was a faint hum he couldn't quite place. He told himself it was nothing. But fear doesn't need proof to grow. It just needs time. And as Caleb stood there in the dark, steadying himself against the wall, he couldn't shake the sense that whatever was wrong with him wasn't finished yet. It was still working. Quietly. By the 5th year, Caleb's life no longer moved outward. It folded inward. He noticed it first in small ways. The unopened suitcase in the guest room, still tagged from a cancelled trip to Vancouver. The calendar on his tablet that once looked like a battlefield of meetings and flights, now mostly empty, save for medical appointments spaced weeks apart. The silence between emails from people who used to need him urgently. Rutherford Holdings continued to operate, but it did so without him. At first, Caleb insisted on staying involved. He joined video calls from his study, sitting perfectly still so no one would notice the slight tremor in his hands. He kept his camera angled carefully, light soft, posture upright. When dizziness hit, he pressed his feet flat into the floor and focused on breathing slowly until the room settled. But even discipline has limits. During one quarterly call, his vision blurred mid-sentence. The faces on the screen smeared together. His words tangled just briefly but long enough. Long enough for someone to ask gently if they should reschedule. Caleb smiled and waved it off. After that, the call stopped, including him automatically. An interim executive team was installed to reduce strain. The language was polite, respectful, final. Caleb signed the documents without protest. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself rest would help. Rest, however, brought something else. Stillness. The mansion in Lake Forest had once felt like a reward. A place he barely occupied between flights. Now it felt cavernous. Rooms went unused for weeks. The grand dining table hosted no one but dust. Even the grounds, meticulously maintained by a small crew, felt distant, like scenery viewed through glass. Caleb limited his movements out of necessity. Some days, walking from the bedroom to the kitchen left him lightheaded. On others, the simple act of standing made his heart race, as if he'd sprinted up a flight of stairs. He learned which chairs were safest, which walls were closest if he needed to steady himself. He stopped driving after a brief episode of vertigo at a stoplight. The world had tilted, traffic lights smearing into color. He'd managed to pull over and sit there until it passed, hands gripping the wheel, chest tight with a fear he hadn't felt since childhood. After that, he handed his keys to an assistant and didn't ask for them back. Friends visited less. At first, they came with concern and jokes, trying to keep things normal. They brought wine he couldn't drink and stories he struggled to follow. Eventually, the visits felt awkward. Conversations stalled. No one knew what to say when nothing had changed. Caleb didn't blame them. He stopped hosting altogether. The house adapted to his retreat. Lights dimmed earlier. Meals were smaller, simpler. Staff moved quietly as if loud sounds might startle him. He appreciated the consideration, but it also reinforced what he'd lost. He spent more time alone in his bedroom. It was the one place he could control completely. Curtains drawn just enough to let in daylight without glare. Temperature adjusted precisely. The bed positioned so he could sit and stand with minimal effort. And beneath it all, the room held a strange familiarity. A smell he couldn't quite identify. Not unpleasant. Just present. Like something old. Some nights, he woke with a headache already blooming, pulse loud in his ears. He'd sit up slowly, waiting for the nausea to pass, eyes fixed on the far wall until the room steadied. On the nightstand, a glass of water often sat untouched. He didn't remember forgetting to drink it. He just hadn't felt like it. On the worst evenings, he lay there listening. The house made noises he couldn't recall from before. A faint vibration through the floor. A low hum that seemed to rise and fall, not quite mechanical, not quite silence either. He told himself it was the heating system or the distance traffic or nothing at all. But the feeling persisted. That the house was no longer just shelter. That it was participating. One afternoon, standing in the hallway outside his bedroom, Caleb caught his reflection in a framed mirror. He looked thinner. Older. Not dramatically so, but enough. His eyes held something unfamiliar. Wariness maybe. Or resignation. For the first time he wondered if this was simply his life now. A slow withdrawal from everything he'd built, dictated by something no one could see or name. He turned back into the bedroom and closed the door. Behind it, the air felt heavier than it should have. And as he lowered himself onto the bed, a dull ache spreading through his temples, he had the unsettling thought that whatever was happening to him felt very comfortable there, as if it belonged. Evelyn Carter arrived on a Tuesday morning, carrying her own supplies even though the agency had told her everything would be provided. She did that everywhere she worked. Not because she distrusted clients but because she trusted routines. Her gloves fit a certain way. Her cleaner smelled neutral. Her cloths were folded just so. Small consistencies mattered when you moved through other people's lives for a living. The gates to the Rutherford property opened slowly, silently. She parked beside a row of trimmed hedges and took a moment before getting out of the car. The house was larger than she'd expected. Not flashy. Just heavy with money. The kind that didn't need to announce itself. Inside, an assistant showed her around. The rules were clear. Certain rooms were off-limits unless requested. Schedules were strict. Privacy was everything. The bedroom, the assistant said, stopping outside a closed door on the upper floor. Just vacuum and dust. Nothing moved. No organizing. Evelyn nodded. She didn't ask why. She'd learned early in this work that questions made people nervous. Observation didn't. Her first impression of Caleb came later, from a distance. He stood at the far end of the hallway, watching quietly as she worked in the living room. He was taller than she'd imagined. Thinner too. His posture was careful, as if every movement had been negotiated in advance. "Good morning," he said. His voice was calm but slightly strained. "Morning," Evelyn replied, offering a small smile and going back to her work. That was the extent of it. Evelyn cleaned with precision. She didn't rush. She didn't linger. She noticed how the house felt rather than how it looked. The air was filtered but stale. The silence too complete. No television murmuring in the background. No music. Just the soft hum of systems working to maintain comfort. When she reached the bedroom, she followed instructions exactly. She vacuumed carefully, stopping just short of the bed frame. She dusted surfaces without shifting objects. She noted the layout without changing it. Curtains half drawn. Nightstand arranged neatly but untouched. A glass of water, full, ringed faintly at the base. The room smelled different from the rest of the house. Not dirty. Not strong. Just metallic, faint, like a memory of something once sharp. Evelyn noticed it immediately and filed it away without comment. Caleb never hovered, but he was always nearby when she cleaned that room. Not watching her hands exactly. Watching the space. Evelyn understood that too. Her days settled into a rhythm. 3 mornings a week. Same entrance. Same routine. Minimal conversation. She learned his habits through absence. He ate lightly. Sometimes not at all. Food trays returned nearly untouched. She noticed which days he stayed in his bedroom until late afternoon, and which days he ventured downstairs and sat in the study, staring at nothing in particular. Once, she heard him retch softly in the bathroom, then run water to cover the sound. She pretended not to notice. Evelyn was good at that. Seeing without intruding. Caring without crossing lines. It was a skill she hadn't wanted once. Years ago, she'd sat in a different house, listening to her mother insist she was fine while her hands shook violently enough to spill tea across the table. Doctors had used calm voices and confident words back then too. Anxiety. Menopause. Stress. Evelyn remembered the smell of disinfectant and the way no one listened until it was too late. So when she noticed Caleb's hands tremble as he signed for a delivery one morning, she didn't comment. She simply steadied the clipboard without making it obvious. "Thank you," he said, meeting her eyes briefly. "You're welcome," she replied. That was all. Weeks passed. Trust of a quiet kind settled in. Caleb stopped retreating as soon as she entered a room. Evelyn learned which floorboards creaked loudest and avoided them when he was resting. But something about the bedroom stayed with her. The smell. The heaviness. The sense that the air there behaved differently. One afternoon as she vacuumed, the machine snagged slightly beneath the bed. Just a tug. Nothing dramatic. Evelyn froze. She shut off the vacuum and knelt, peering into the shadow beneath the frame. Something was there. Long low. Pushed far back as if someone didn't want to see it. She straightened slowly and stood. She didn't pull it out. She didn't ask about it. She turned the vacuum back on and finished the room exactly as instructed. But as she left, closing the door behind her, Evelyn glanced back once more. The air felt wrong. And whatever was under that bed had been there a very long time. Evelyn didn't mention what she'd seen under the bed. Not that day. Not the next. Instead, she watched. It wasn't suspicion at first. It was pattern recognition. The same habit that made her notice when a client's routine shifted by minutes, or when a room smelled different after being cleaned. She paid attention the way some people listened to music, picking up rhythms others missed. Caleb's good days followed no predictable schedule. They arrived without warning and left just as quietly. On those mornings he moved with something close to ease. He came downstairs on his own. He drank coffee slowly, standing at the kitchen counter, staring out the window as if the trees were telling him something worth hearing. His voice sounded steadier when he spoke. His hands shook less. On bad days the house seemed to tighten around him. He stayed upstairs. The curtains remained half-drawn well past noon. Food trays sat untouched outside his door until staff removed them again. When Evelyn passed the bedroom, she could hear him moving inside. Slow steps. A chair scraping softly across the floor. The sound of someone sitting down too carefully. And always on those days the smell was stronger. It wasn't dramatic. No sharp sting. Just a faint sweetness layered over metal, like pennies left in a damp pocket. It clung low in the room, never quite reaching the hallway. Evelyn noticed something else too. The full glasses of water. She emptied them when instructed to clean. Refilled them. Set them back in the same spot. And yet, more often than not, she found them untouched hours later. On better days they were half empty. On worse days not a sip gone. Once, while dusting the nightstand, she hesitated with the glass in her hand. The water looked slightly cloudy. Not dirty. Just off. She set it back without comment. She told herself she was overthinking. Still, she began to mentally chart things. Caleb's symptoms. The smell. The days he worsened. The days he improved. She didn't write it down. She didn't need to. The connections formed quietly in her mind, like threads tightening. The first time she almost said something, she stopped herself. Caleb was sitting in the study, pale, shoulders slumped, staring at a stack of unopened mail. His hand trembled as he tried to sort through it. "You don't have to do that now," Evelyn said gently. He looked up, startled, as if he'd forgotten she was there. "I'm just trying to keep up," he replied. The words sounded rehearsed. She wanted to ask how he was feeling. Wanted to point out that something wasn't right. That the house itself seemed to be part of his decline. Instead, she nodded and stepped back. Boundaries mattered. But so did timing. A few days later, she noticed the vacuum tug again beneath the bed. Harder this time. Enough to make the machine jolt in her hands. She turned it off and crouched lower than before, angling her phone's flashlight toward the shadows. She could see the edge of a storage container now. Plastic. Discolored. Warped slightly along one side. It looked older than anything else in the room. Older than the furniture. Older than the house's last renovation. It wasn't centered. It had been pushed far back, almost flush with the wall, as if someone had taken care to hide it from casual view. Evelyn straightened slowly, her knees protesting. She stood there longer than necessary, listening. From inside the bathroom, she heard Caleb cough. What? Then again. He ran water immediately afterward. That night, she went home unsettled. She lay awake longer than usual, replaying details she'd tried to ignore. The smell. The container. The way Caleb's symptoms flared in cycles. The way doctors couldn't find anything inside his body that explained what was happening to it. She remembered her mother sitting at the kitchen table, insisting she was fine while the room smelled faintly of chemicals from a space heater no one had bothered to inspect. How long it had taken anyone to question the environment instead of the person. By the next morning, Evelyn had made a quiet decision. She wouldn't accuse. She wouldn't assume. But she would stop pretending this was none of her business. That afternoon, as she finished vacuuming the bedroom and stood to leave, she paused at the door. Caleb was sitting on the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "Mr. Rutherford," she said carefully, keeping her voice neutral. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up, eyes wary but attentive. "What is it?" Evelyn hesitated just long enough to choose her words. "How long has that box been under your bed?" The silence that followed was immediate, heavy, and very telling. Caleb's hand froze mid-motion, a folded newspaper trembling slightly in his grip. His eyes flicked to Evelyn, then down to the floor, then back again. He blinked slowly, as if processing a question he had been trying to avoid for years. "It's storage," he said finally, voice low and controlled. "Old things. Nothing important." Evelyn nodded, keeping her tone neutral, careful not to push. She had learned over time that certain walls didn't need to be breached too quickly. "May I take a look?" she asked softly. He stiffened. Every muscle in his tall frame seemed to tighten. "No," he said immediately. "I'd prefer you didn't touch it." The word carried weight beyond simple refusal. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something more primal. Fear, or perhaps a protective instinct. Caleb didn't fully understand himself. Evelyn studied him. The pause. The way his jaw clenched just slightly. She noticed the faint tremor in his hands as they rested on the newspaper. "All right," she said, stepping back. She finished the room as she always did, methodically, quietly, but her mind refused to leave the space. The box had shifted something in her awareness, though she couldn't yet articulate why. Over the next few days, Evelyn watched more closely. She noted the pattern. On days Caleb's energy was low, the smell in the bedroom, metallic and faintly sweet, grew more pronounced. She noticed the water glasses left untouched for hours, sometimes overnight. She noticed how he avoided looking at the space under the bed, tilting his body slightly when he sat down, as if the very presence of the box required effort to ignore. On the 5th day, Caleb collapsed. It wasn't dramatic, not like in the movies. There were no shouts, no grand swoon to the floor. He was coming down the stairs slowly, gripping the banister, when his vision blurred and his legs betrayed him. His knees buckled, and he slid the last 3 steps into the safety of the hallway carpet. His forehead pressed to the soft fibers, chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. Evelyn was there in seconds. She had been in the kitchen, just finishing a light breakfast tray when she heard the subtle thud. She rushed over, heart hammering, and knelt beside him. "Mr. Rutherford," she said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Can you sit up? You're going to be okay." He groaned, pushing himself upright slowly, face pale. I'm fine," he said, but the words lacked conviction. His usual composure had cracked. Evelyn didn't argue. She helped him to a nearby chair and sat across from him, keeping her movements calm and deliberate. She was careful not to let the panic she felt show. She had learned early in life that if you let fear rule the moment, it only multiplies. Minutes passed in tense silence. Caleb's breathing gradually steadied, though his hand still shook as he gripped the armrest. Finally he spoke, almost to himself. Maybe I do need help." Evelyn's heart skipped. That small admission, barely audible, was enormous. It opened a door that had been closed for years. Not completely, not permanently, but enough for her to see a crack. Later, as he rested, she found herself reflecting on everything she had noticed. The patterns, the smells, the untouched water glasses, the subtle signs of his body failing quietly over years. And she realized something. This wasn't just a medical problem that had gone unsolved. This was Environmental. Something in the house, something persistent, something hidden, could be worsening his condition. But even as the thought took shape, she knew one thing clearly: the box under the bed had to be investigated. She wasn't going to violate his trust yet, not openly. But she had to start planning how she would approach it. She had learned from her own life that waiting too long sometimes cost more than courage ever would. As she left the room that evening, Evelyn cast one more glance at the bed. The shadow beneath seemed to darken in the soft light of the late afternoon. She shivered slightly. There was something there. Something that had waited too long. And for the first time she felt certain it was not just a box. It was a secret. One that would not remain hidden forever. That night, Caleb didn't sleep. He lay on his back, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house. The central heating, normally comforting, sounded sharper somehow, more insistent. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind against the windows, made him flinch. He tried to focus on breathing, on the rhythm he had practiced for years, but it didn't help. His chest felt tight. His hands trembled just slightly on the quilt. It had been a long time since he'd felt this level of fear. Not the abstract fear that came with business deals or travel deadlines. This was deeper, personal, and utterly isolating. By morning he had made a decision. When Evelyn arrived with her usual quiet efficiency, he didn't wait to put up walls or deflect. "Evelyn," he said as she reached the top of the stairs. The voice was softer than usual. Hesitant. "I think we need to talk." She paused mid-step, sensing the weight in his words. "Of course," she replied calmly, though her own heart beat faster. He gestured toward the study. The chair at the desk groaned slightly as he sank into it, and she pulled up a smaller chair opposite him. For the first time, the space between them didn't feel like a formal boundary, it felt charged with something heavier. "I can't keep doing this," he admitted quietly. "Doctors, specialists, nothing helps. And now it's getting worse." He rubbed his temples, eyes narrowing against the dull ache. "I can't live like this anymore." Evelyn nodded slowly, not interrupting. She had expected the words eventually, but hearing them from him, finally, carried more weight than she anticipated. "You're afraid," she said gently, "of what's happening to your body." He exhaled sharply. "Afraid? Yes. But more than that. I'm afraid of being helpless. Afraid of being poisoned in a sense. I feel it every day. Something in this house, something unseen, is making me worse." Evelyn's mind immediately went to the box. She didn't speak yet. She watched him, letting him continue. He shook his head, running a hand through hair that had once been meticulously styled. "I know it sounds crazy. I know you'll think I'm imagining it. But it's not the illness itself. It's something else. Something persistent. Something that's been here longer than I want to admit." Evelyn leaned forward slightly, keeping her tone soft. "You're not imagining it. I've noticed patterns too. Things I didn't comment on because I wasn't sure. But I believe you." Caleb's eyes widened slightly. You do." "I do," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I've seen the changes, the bad days. I've noticed some things that don't fit the medical explanations. And I think we need to look closer. Carefully, but we need to know." He stayed silent for a long moment. Then finally he nodded slowly, almost reluctantly. "There's something under my bed. I've never allowed anyone to touch it. Ever." Evelyn's stomach tightened. The moment she had been anticipating was here. She didn't speak. She simply waited, giving him space to decide how far he would go. "I can't do this alone anymore," Caleb continued, voice quieter now. "I need someone to see what I can't. Someone I trust. I trust you." Evelyn swallowed, a mix of relief and tension coursing through her. "I'll be careful," she promised. "But we have to see what's there. For your safety." He hesitated again, the internal battle clear in his posture. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he exhaled, defeated. "All right," he said softly. "You can look. But just look. Nothing else." Evelyn nodded. She didn't smile. She didn't make a sound. The air between them was thick, heavy with anticipation. As she stood and moved toward the bed, Caleb shifted slightly to give her room. The container under the shadows looked innocuous from the edge of her vision, almost like it belonged there. But something about it, combined with everything he had said, made her hesitate. Her hand hovered over it, not yet touching. And then she realized, whatever was inside that box could finally explain 9 years of unanswered questions. Or it could make everything far worse. She drew a slow, deliberate breath. And then she reached for it. The air in the room seemed to tighten as her fingers brushed the edge of the container. Something long hidden was about to surface. And no one could predict how Caleb would react once the secret finally came into the light. Caleb sat tensely in his chair, hands gripping the arms so tightly his knuckles turned white. He watched as Evelyn crouched beside the bed, flashlight in hand, tracing the shadows beneath the frame. The container had been pushed far back, almost flush with the wall, its edges warped and faded. Dust clung stubbornly to its surface, as if it had been undisturbed for decades. "Be careful," he murmured, voice quieter than usual. Not a warning. More of a plea. Evelyn nodded without looking up. Her focus was absolute. She slid the flashlight across the floor, catching a faint metallic glint along the container's seam. The hum of the house seemed louder now, pressing against their awareness, almost as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. "I'm going slow," she said softly. "Nothing's moving too fast." Caleb exhaled, trying to steady the tremor in his chest. The air in the room felt thick, heavy. Every sense was heightened: the faint metallic scent, the lingering sweetness in the dust, the cool smoothness of the hardwood beneath his bare feet. Evelyn finally eased the container out from under the bed. It was heavier than it looked, the plastic rigid and fragile at the same time. She placed it carefully on the carpet, as if a single wrong move might shatter more than the material. Caleb leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on it. "Where did this come from?" he asked, though the words felt awkward, incomplete. "I don't know yet," Evelyn replied. She didn't rush to open it. Not yet. She wanted him calm, grounded, ready for what they might find. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the soft click of the flashlight switch. Caleb's mind raced. He remembered the day it had arrived, an unmarked delivery long ago. He had tucked it under the bed quickly, thinking it temporary. That night he'd slept fitfully, uneasy, but dismissed it. Over the years, the box became a background fixture. Out of sight, out of mind, or so he'd hoped. Why didn't I ever open it?" he muttered, almost to himself. "I should have checked sooner." "Maybe you had other things to worry about," Evelyn said gently. "Or maybe it felt safer to leave it be." "That's understandable." He nodded, swallowing hard. His throat was dry. The usual dread returned, that quiet weight that had grown heavier each year he'd ignored it. Evelyn knelt beside the box, fingertips brushing the warped lid. "I need to see inside," she said softly. "For your sake." Caleb hesitated. He wanted to stop her. Part of him longed to maintain control, to protect what little he had left of certainty. But another part, the part that had endured 9 years of unexplained illness, recognized that confrontation was inevitable. "Okay," he whispered finally. "Just be careful." She lifted the lid slowly. A faint creak echoed in the room. The metallic scent became sharper, more distinct. Dust puffed into the air, swirling in the beam of the flashlight. Inside lay several small, sealed containers, each marked with labels Caleb had long since forgotten. The smell intensified. One container appeared corroded, dark stains spreading across the plastic. Evelyn's brow furrowed. She picked up the corroded one carefully. Caleb leaned closer, heart thudding. He recognized the chemicals immediately, not by name but by the memories of their scent, the faint metallic bite lingering in the back of his throat. Something in these containers had been affecting him all along. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly and she glanced at him. Mr. Rutherford, this could explain everything. Caleb felt a mix of relief and terror wash over him. Relief that there might finally be an answer. Terror at the realization that something he had ignored, something hidden in his own home, had been slowly undermining him for nearly a decade. Why was this here? He asked, voice shaking. Who put this under my bed? Evelyn shook her head slowly. I don't know yet, but we'll find out. We have to. For your safety. Caleb slumped back in the chair, the weight of 9 years pressing down in a way that was almost physical. He realized that his control, the one thing he had clung to, had been an illusion. All along, the danger had been silent, hidden, and patient. He looked at Evelyn and, for the first time in years, spoke without hesitation. Thank you. For noticing. For everything. She offered a small, steady smile. I just did what I had to. We're not done yet. And as she carefully began examining the containers, Caleb felt something stir inside him. A mix of fear, hope, and the uneasy understanding that the answers were finally coming. But he didn't yet know that what Evelyn had found under the bed would not only explain his illness, it would also shatter everything he thought he knew about safety, trust, and the quiet spaces of his own home. The room seemed to hold its breath. And outside, the house whispered softly as if waiting to see what would happen next. The next few days felt different in the mansion, though outwardly nothing had changed. The walls remained the same creamy white. The polished floors reflected the sunlight just as they always had. The humming of the air system continued its quiet background rhythm. But to Caleb and to Evelyn, the atmosphere felt heavier, more charged, as if the house itself was aware of what had been uncovered. Caleb tried to maintain his usual routines. Breakfast at exactly 8, a light walk down the hallway checking messages on the tablet. But each step carried a new awareness. Every glance toward the bedroom reminded him of the small containers that had emerged from beneath his bed. Their presence, though physically confined, seemed to press into every corner of his world. Evelyn noticed the change too. Her work took on a quieter, more cautious quality. When she cleaned, she moved deliberately, paying attention not just to what was visible but to the subtle signals in the room, the faint chemical smell that lingered, the way light hit the containers, even the micro shifts in Caleb's posture as he reacted unconsciously to them. One afternoon, she found herself pausing near the study door. Caleb was sitting at the desk, staring at the containers with his hands folded in front of him, face pale. The metallic scent in the air was stronger now, almost clinging to the edge of her sleeves. Have you been feeling worse? She asked carefully. Caleb shook his head slowly. No, not exactly. But I feel exposed, vulnerable. I can't ignore that this has been here, affecting me all this time. He rubbed the side of his face, jaw tight. All these years, and no one, no doctor, ever noticed. I feel cheated and angry. Evelyn nodded, understanding. She had spent her life observing patterns that others ignored. She had seen what denial could do in families, in workplaces, in personal health. It's not your fault, she said softly. You couldn't know what to look for. And 9 years of unanswered tests. Anyone would feel frustrated. He closed his eyes, leaning back in the chair. It's more than frustration. It's betrayal, by my own body and by the systems I trusted. And yet, it's worse than that. It's fear. The fear that whatever was making me sick isn't finished yet. Evelyn stayed quiet for a moment, letting him speak. Then she said, that fear isn't unfounded. There's still work to do. But we'll do it together. Step by step. Carefully. He opened his eyes, studying her face. You really believe we can find answers? I do, she replied steadily. But it won't be instant. And it won't be easy. Some of the answers may be unpleasant. Some may change everything you thought you knew about your life, your home, and even the people around you. Caleb swallowed, heart hammering. The room seemed to close in slightly. Shadows deepened under the furniture. The faint hum in the walls grew louder to his ears, almost pulsing in rhythm with his own heartbeat. That night he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Evelyn had gone home, but the house felt different now. Alive in a way that was both comforting and threatening. The containers remained in the bedroom, their secret partially revealed but still enigmatic. He couldn't stop thinking about the smell, metallic, sweet, insistent. He remembered faint tinges of it throughout the past years, but he had ignored them, dismissed them as imagination. Now it was undeniable, persistent. And he realized something chilling. The illness he'd lived with for nearly a decade hadn't been random. It hadn't been internal or purely physiological. It had been environmental. Deliberate, slow, and patient. A shiver ran down his spine. He rose slowly from the bed and walked to the edge, barefoot on the cool wood. He looked beneath the frame, noting the space where the containers had rested. The emptiness didn't feel reassuring. If anything, it felt like a warning. Evelyn had said she would handle it carefully. But Caleb knew deep down that answers often carried consequences no one could predict. And as he stood there listening to the quiet hum of the mansion, he realized the truth. The box under his bed hadn't just been a hidden object. It had been a slow, invisible force that had shaped his life for 9 years. He pressed his palms against his temples, trying to steady the rising panic. The metallic scent lingered faintly in the room, clinging to the corners like a shadow. And for the first time in nearly a decade, Caleb felt the weight of uncertainty more acutely than the weight of his illness. Because whatever had been affecting him for 9 years might not have finished its work yet. The question that had been whispering in the back of his mind now roared in his chest. Had he finally uncovered the worst of it, or was the real danger only beginning? The following morning, Caleb moved slowly through the kitchen, the faint metallic tang in the air still clinging to his senses. Evelyn had returned, arriving with her usual quiet precision. She carried a notebook this time, something she rarely needed for her cleaning, but she wanted to track every observation, every reaction, every detail of the containers and Caleb's environment. "Morning," she said softly, setting the notebook down on the counter. "Morning," Caleb replied, voice tight, low, careful. Even after the previous day's revelations, he wasn't used to speaking freely about the situation, especially aloud. They moved into the study together. Caleb watched her as she gently opened the first container, gloves in place, the smell hitting more strongly now that it was unsealed. He pressed a hand to his chest. His stomach twisted, not from nausea exactly, but from a visceral recognition of what these chemicals could have done to him over the years. Evelyn worked methodically, examining labels, reading faint handwriting, noting discoloration and residue. "These appear to be industrial compounds," she murmured. "Some toxic if inhaled or ingested over long periods. And some of these containers are decades old. But that one," she paused, holding up a small, corroded vial. "That one has degraded enough to release particles into the air." Caleb's throat went dry. "Particles? You mean, I've been breathing this whole time?" Evelyn nodded carefully. "It's possible. Chronic exposure. Which would explain the inconsistency of your symptoms, the tremors, the dizziness, the fatigue, even the intermittent vision problems. This would evade medical detection because it's not a single acute event. It's slow, cumulative." He sank into his chair, hands trembling slightly. 9 years, 9 years of appointments, tests, specialists, all of it, for nothing. And it was here, under my bed. All this time. Evelyn hesitated. She knew that while answers could bring relief, they also brought anger, guilt, and disbelief. "It's not your fault," she said firmly. "You couldn't have known. And no doctor could have predicted hidden exposure inside your own home. This was well concealed." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, voice low and taut. "Concealed by whom? Who would, why?" That was the question neither of them could answer yet. The labels on the containers were indecipherable in places, faded with age. Some had addresses, but none linked directly to anyone he knew. Whoever had put these here had been careful, almost surgical in their concealment. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the anger he'd suppressed for years. The frustration of doctors, the isolation of his illness, the fear that had taken root in the quiet of his own home. It all collided in a single, sharp wave. Evelyn gently placed the vial back in its container, sealing it as best as she could. We need to document everything carefully. And we need to consider a controlled investigation. Professionals who can analyze these chemicals safely, trace their origins, and confirm the exposure levels. Caleb nodded slowly, exhaustion and determination warring in his expression. Yes, do whatever it takes. I don't care about embarrassment, secrecy, any of it. I just want answers. I want this fixed. Evelyn hesitated, watching him closely. There's one more thing, she said softly. We need to understand how long this has been affecting you. The duration, the intensity, it may not just explain your illness. It may also explain why some symptoms are intermittent, why doctors couldn't find anything. The exposure itself was likely inconsistent. Caleb felt the weight of her words settle heavily over him. Intermittent exposure. Concealed chemicals. 9 years of unknowable influence on his body and mind. The house he had once trusted as a sanctuary had become a slow, silent predator. He pressed his palms to his face, trying to steady the rising panic. And all this time, I thought it was me. That I was broken. That my body was failing me for no reason. Evelyn placed a hand lightly on his arm. It wasn't you. None of it was your fault. But now we know where to start. Now we can begin to fight it systematically and safely. Caleb exhaled, slowly, shakily. For the first time in years, clarity started to form amidst the fear. The mystery of his illness was no longer abstract. It had a tangible source. It had a name, a place, a presence. But as the two of them began to plan the next steps, scientific testing, tracing the chemicals, consulting toxicologists, Caleb couldn't shake a gnawing doubt. If someone had put these containers here deliberately, had they intended harm? Or had it been an accident decades ago and now forgotten? And more importantly, if it had been deliberate, was the person still close enough to act again? The thought made his stomach twist. And somewhere in the quiet of the mansion, the shadows under the bed seemed to grow heavier, as if holding secrets they weren't yet ready to release. The call came just after sunset. Caleb was sitting in the den, staring at nothing, when his phone buzzed on the side table. An unfamiliar number. He almost ignored it. Lately, every call felt like another demand on a body and mind already stretched thin. But something about the timing, about the quiet that had settled too heavily over the house, made him answer. "Mr. Hale?" a man asked. His voice was calm, professional, carefully neutral. "Yes. This is Dr. Leonard Pierce. I'm a clinical toxicologist at St. Vincent Medical Center. Your associate sent over preliminary photos and descriptions of several containers found in your residence." Caleb's fingers tightened around the phone. Evelyn had moved faster than he expected. "Yes," Caleb said. Have you seen anything like this before?" There was a pause. "Not long, but long enough." "I've seen similar compounds," Pierce replied, "but not in a domestic setting, and not stored the way you're describing." Caleb swallowed. "What does that mean?" "It means," the doctor said carefully, "that whoever placed those substances under your bed understood their properties, their volatility, their degradation patterns. This wasn't casual storage." Caleb closed his eyes. Dr. Pierce continued. "Based on what I've reviewed so far, long-term low-dose exposure could absolutely produce the symptoms you've described. Neurological confusion, tremors, fatigue, mood instability. The reason standard tests failed is because your exposure wasn't constant. It came in waves." Caleb felt a chill crawl up his spine. Waves? Yes. Temperature changes. Air circulation. Even movement in the room could have released small amounts at irregular intervals. Enough to cause damage, but not enough to trigger obvious toxic markers. So, Caleb said quietly, someone could make a person sick, without killing them. Slowly. Another pause. This one heavier. Yes, Pierce said. That is possible. After the call ended, Caleb sat motionless for a long time. The truth was no longer abstract. It had shape now. Intent. Precision. Across the room, Evelyn stood near the doorway. She had heard enough from his side of the conversation to read the rest in his face. They think it was intentional, Caleb said before she could speak. Evelyn nodded once. I was afraid of that. Caleb stood abruptly, pacing. His movements were restless, uneven. I don't understand. I don't have enemies. I don't. I keep my circle small. I always have. Small circles are easier to infiltrate, Evelyn said gently. He stopped. Looked at her. You think this was someone I knew? I think, she replied carefully, that the level of access required suggests familiarity. Someone who knew the house. The layout. Someone who knew you wouldn't look under the bed. Caleb's jaw tightened. Memories surfaced uninvited. Old conversations. Old partnerships. The renovation years ago after he bought the property. Contractors. Designers. One person in particular lingered at the edge of his thoughts, but he pushed it away. No, he said. That doesn't make sense. Evelyn watched him closely. Denial is normal, she said. But we shouldn't ignore patterns. Later that night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay on his side, staring at the space where the bed skirt met the floor. The containers were gone now, removed by a hazardous materials team that arrived quietly and left without questions. But the space felt wrong. Exposed. At around 2 a.m. he got up and walked barefoot through the house. His steps echoed softly on the polished floors. He found himself in the guest wing, standing outside a room that hadn't been used in years. The door was locked. That was odd. He frowned, trying the handle again. Still locked. Caleb fetched a spare key from the hall cabinet. His hand shook as he inserted it into the lock. The door opened with a soft click. The room was immaculate. Too immaculate. No dust. No stale smell. As if someone had been inside recently. On the desk, neatly stacked, were folders. Caleb picked one up. Inside were medical articles. Toxicology reports. Highlighted passages. Notes scribbled in the margins. His chest tightened. At the bottom of the stack was an old photograph. It showed him, years younger, standing beside another man at a groundbreaking ceremony. Smiling. Arm around the other's shoulder. Someone he had trusted completely. Caleb's breath caught. The realization hit him slowly, painfully. This hadn't started 9 years ago. It had been planned long before that. And whoever did this hadn't just wanted him sick. They wanted him doubting his own mind. Caleb stood alone in the silent room, the evidence trembling in his hands as a single terrifying thought took hold. What if the person responsible wasn't gone? What if they were still watching? Caleb didn't sleep at all after that. He sat at the kitchen table until dawn, the folders spread out in front of him like pieces of a crime scene no one had bothered to tape off. Medical journals. Toxic exposure case studies. Marginal notes written in a hand he recognized but hadn't seen in years. Clean. Precise. Almost elegant. Evelyn joined him just before sunrise. She didn't ask why he was awake. She saw it in his eyes. You found something, she said. Caleb slid one of the folders toward her. That guest room. It's been used. Recently. Evelyn flipped through the pages slowly. Her face didn't change, but her shoulders stiffened. This isn't casual reading, she said. This is research. Focused research. He nodded. Someone studying how to make a person deteriorate without obvious cause. And documenting it, Evelyn added quietly. Caleb rubbed his temples. A dull ache pulsed behind his eyes, familiar and bitter. I know who it is. She stopped turning pages. Looked up. Are you sure? I don't want to be, he said. But the handwriting, the photo, the timing, it fits too well. He pushed the photograph toward her. The groundbreaking ceremony. 2 men in suits. One of them smiling the way people smile when they believe they're untouchable. Evelyn studied it for a moment. Who is he? Daniel Crow, Caleb said. The name felt heavy in his mouth. My former business partner. She waited. We built the firm together, Caleb continued. I handled operations. He handled strategy. Vision. Or at least that's what he called it. We disagreed a lot. About ethics. About risk. And how did it end? Evelyn asked. Caleb exhaled slowly. I forced him out. The words hung there. He wanted to cut corners, Caleb said. Unsafe manufacturing processes. Off-the-books disposal. I wouldn't sign off on it. When I found proof he'd already done it, I took it to the board. They backed me. And he lost everything, Evelyn said. Not everything, Caleb replied. He kept his severance, his shares, his reputation mostly. But he lost control. He hated that more than anything. Evelyn leaned back. So he had motive. And access. Yes, Caleb said. During the renovations. He recommended the contractor. Oversaw part of the redesign himself. Said it was a peace offering. Closure. Evelyn closed the folder. And you believed him. I wanted to, Caleb admitted. I was tired of fighting. They sat in silence as the sun crept through the windows, lighting dust motes in the air. Caleb watched them float, suddenly hyper-aware of everything he breathed. I need proof, Caleb said finally. Not suspicion. Not theories. Evelyn nodded. Then we proceed carefully. We document everything. We don't confront him yet. Yet, Caleb repeated. That afternoon, Caleb received an email. Subject line, long time. No greeting. No explanation. Just a single sentence. I heard you've been unwell. Caleb stared at the screen. His pulse thudded in his ears. How would he know? Caleb whispered. Evelyn stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. That email wasn't sent to check on you, she said. It was sent to see how much damage was done. Caleb's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He wants me to respond. And if you do, Evelyn said, you tell him nothing. Not about the chemicals. Not about the bed. Not about the investigation. Caleb typed slowly. Asterisk doing fine. Just taking time off. Asterisk. He hesitated, then hit send. Minutes passed. Then another message appeared. Asterisk glad to hear it. Maybe we should catch up. For old time's sake. Asterisk. Caleb leaned back, nausea rising. He wants to see me. Evelyn's expression hardened. Of course he does. He wants to look at you. Measure you. That evening, Caleb walked through the house with a new awareness. Every corner felt suspect. Every quiet sound felt intentional. He locked doors he hadn't locked in years. Checked rooms he hadn't entered since the day he moved in. When he reached the bedroom, he stopped. The space under the bed was empty now. Clean. Neutralized. But the memory of what had been there pressed down on him like weight. As he turned away, something caught his eye. A faint scuff mark on the hardwood floor. Near the wall. Recently made. He crouched, heart pounding, and pulled gently at the baseboard. It shifted. Behind it was a narrow cavity. And inside that cavity was a small, sealed envelope. Caleb stared at it, dread blooming in his chest. This wasn't just about making him sick. This was about leaving messages. And whoever had been doing it hadn't finished yet. Caleb didn't open the envelope right away. He stood there for a long moment, crouched by the wall, the faint hum of the house filling the silence. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, sealed with care. Not rushed. Not hidden in panic. placed with intention. Evelyn watched from the doorway. If it's a threat, she said quietly, we document it before reacting. Caleb nodded, though his hands were already shaking. He carried the envelope to the kitchen, set it on the table, and slid a letter opener beneath the flap. The paper inside was folded once. No letterhead. No date. Just handwriting. You always like things neat, it read. Asterisk predictable. Orderly. You never noticed what was right beneath you. Asterisk. Caleb's breath caught. He felt something cold settle in his chest. Evelyn leaned in. There's more. He turned the page. Asterisk, you took something from me? I took my time returning the favor. Asterisk. Asterisk, don't worry. You weren't meant to die. That would have been too obvious. Asterisk. Caleb let the paper fall onto the table. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. He's admitting it, he said. Not directly. But he wants me to know. He wants control, Evelyn replied. Fear is part of that. Caleb laughed once, sharply. Fear? He's been living in my walls. Under my bed. For nearly a decade. Evelyn studied the letter again. This isn't recent, she said. The language. The ink. This was written years ago. Maybe even before the symptoms peaked. Caleb frowned. Then why leave it now? Because he knows you're close, she said. Or because he wants to remind you that he's always been ahead. That night, Caleb dreamed of the house breathing. Walls expanding and contracting. Floors whispering. He woke drenched in sweat, heart racing, convinced for a split second that someone was standing at the foot of the bed. No one was there. The next morning he agreed to meet Daniel. They chose a public place. A quiet cafe near the waterfront, late afternoon. Plenty of people. Plenty of exits. Evelyn insisted on sitting at a nearby table, close enough to see, far enough to listen without being obvious. Daniel arrived first. He looked, well. That was the first thing Caleb noticed. Relaxed posture. Clear eyes. No sign of guilt on his face. When he saw Caleb, he smiled and stood, arms open in a gesture that felt rehearsed. Caleb, Daniel said warmly. You look thinner. Caleb forced a polite nod. You look exactly the same. They sat. Ordered coffee. Small talk followed. Weather. The city. Mutual acquaintances who hadn't spoken to either of them in years. Daniel stirred his drink slowly. I heard you stepped back from the company, he said casually. Health reasons, Caleb replied. Daniel nodded, sympathetic. I'm sorry. I always worried the stress would catch up to you. Caleb studied him. Every movement felt measured. Every word chosen with care. You ever regret how things ended between us? Caleb asked. Daniel looked surprised. Then thoughtful. Regret? No. Disappointed, maybe. We could have built something unstoppable if you'd trusted me. Caleb leaned back. Trusted you with what? Daniel's smile tightened just slightly. With understanding how the world really works. Silence stretched between them. Daniel took a sip of coffee. You know, he said lightly, some illnesses don't come from inside the body. They come from environments, from pressure, from long-term exposure to unpleasant conditions. Caleb's pulse spiked. That sounds like something you'd read in one of your journals. Daniel met his gaze. Held it. You always did underestimate how much I prepare. Caleb felt the urge to stand, to shout, to accuse him in front of everyone. But he didn't. He stayed still. Daniel leaned closer, lowering his voice. I'm glad you're feeling better, he said. It would be a shame if you missed what comes next. What comes next? Caleb asked. Daniel smiled again. This time it didn't reach his eyes. Closure. Daniel stood, placed a few bills on the table, and walked away without looking back. Evelyn joined Caleb moments later. He knows, she said. And he's enjoying this. Caleb nodded slowly. His hands were steady now. Too steady. That evening, Caleb received a package. No return address. Left with security, signed for by someone he didn't recognize. Inside was a small wooden box. And inside the box was a key. Attached to it was a tag with a single handwritten word. Basement. Caleb stared at it, a sinking realization forming. There were still parts of his house he hadn't searched. And whoever had done this wasn't done revealing them. Caleb stood at the top of the basement stairs for a long time before moving. The door had always been there. Solid. Locked. Unremarkable. He'd used the basement for storage years ago, then stopped when the house began to feel wrong. He told himself it was convenience, that he didn't need anything down there. Now he wondered how much of that had been instinct. The key was heavy in his hand. Old-fashioned. Not the kind you replaced casually. When he inserted it into the lock, it slid in smoothly as if it had been waiting. The door opened with a low groan. Cool air rolled up the stairs, carrying the smell of dust, metal, and something faintly chemical. Not sharp. Not obvious. Subtle enough to ignore if you weren't looking for it. Evelyn stood a step behind him. Lights first, she said. Then we move slow. Caleb flipped the switch. The basement lights hummed to life, revealing a wide concrete space divided into sections. Shelving along one wall. Old furniture covered in sheets. Boxes stacked neatly, labeled in black marker. Too neatly. This doesn't look abandoned, Caleb said. No, Evelyn agreed. It looks maintained. They descended carefully. Caleb's footsteps echoed, each one amplifying the tension coiled in his chest. As they moved deeper, details began to stand out. A workbench. Clink. Recently wiped. Tools arranged with precision. This was a workspace, Caleb murmured. Evelyn ran a gloved finger along the edge of the bench. Still is. On the far wall, partially hidden behind a rolling storage rack, was a metal cabinet. Industrial. Locked with a simple latch. Caleb opened it. Inside were more containers. Smaller than the ones found under the bed, but similar in composition. Sealed vials. Absorbent pads. Filters. A portable ventilation unit, compact and modified. Evelyn inhaled sharply. This wasn't just storage, she said. This was a delivery system. Caleb felt his knees weaken. He didn't just put something under my bed and leave. He adjusted it. Maintained it. Yes, Evelyn said softly. Someone came back. Repeatedly. Caleb's mind raced backward through the years. Business trips when symptoms worsened. Weeks when the house smelled faintly different. Times he blamed himself for feeling off, for being tired, for forgetting things. God, he whispered. He was inside my home. They continued searching. Behind another shelf, they found a small table with a notebook resting on it. No dust. No discoloration. Caleb opened it. Dates filled the pages. Observations. Short clinical notes. Asterisk March 12th, ventilation effective. Subject experiencing disorientation. Asterisk. June 4th, increased irritability reported publicly. October 19th, medical leave extended. Caleb slammed the notebook shut while rising in his throat. He tracked me, he said hoarsely. Like an experiment. Evelyn's voice tightened. This is beyond revenge. This is obsession. At the bottom of the cabinet, tucked behind a false panel, they found something else. A security badge. Not Daniel's. Caleb stared at it. That's not his company. Evelyn examined it closely. This belongs to a property management firm. One that provides private maintenance services. Caleb's heart pounded. You're saying he didn't do this alone? I'm saying, Evelyn replied carefully, that someone with authorized access helped him. Or was paid not to ask questions. The scope of it widened suddenly, terrifyingly. This wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was a system. Quiet. Coordinated. Invisible. A sound echoed above them. Footsteps. Both of them froze. The steps were slow. Deliberate. Moving across the floor above the basement. Caleb's breath caught. Evelyn. She raised a hand, signaling silence. The footsteps stopped, then resumed, heading toward the basement door. Caleb's pulse roared in his ears. The house was supposed to be secure. No visitors. No staff scheduled. The doorknob turned. Lock. Pause. Then a soft knock. Caleb, a voice called. Familiar. Come. Daniel. Caleb's blood went cold. How did he get in? Caleb whispered. Evelyn's eyes flicked to the security badge in her hand. The knock came again, firmer this time. I know you're home, Daniel said lightly. We should talk. You found the basement, didn't you? Caleb felt the weight of 9 stolen years pressing down on him. Fear. Rage. A strange, burning clarity. Daniel wasn't hiding anymore. And whatever control he thought he had was about to be tested. Caleb stepped toward the stairs, heart hammering as Evelyn grabbed his arm. Not yet, she whispered. Let him show his hand. Above them, Daniel chuckled softly. Oh, Caleb, he said through the door. You always did take too long to look beneath the surface. The basement lights flickered once, then held. And Caleb realized this confrontation was exactly what Daniel had been waiting for. Caleb's grip tightened on the railing of the basement stairs, knuckles white as Evelyn pressed close behind him. The faint metallic tang from the containers still lingered in the air, sharp now, almost accusing. Every instinct in his body screamed to bolt, to run, to lock every door in the house, but he stayed rooted, aware that fear was exactly what Daniel wanted. The basement door rattled slightly with Daniel's weight on the other side. Calm. Confident. Every movement deliberate, measured. The kind of calm that comes from knowing someone else holds all the cards, at least in their own mind. Caleb exhaled slowly. You're not leaving without answers, he muttered under his breath. Evelyn shook her head slightly, placing a steady hand on his back. No sudden moves, she said. Let's hear him out. Control the room, control yourself. Daniel's voice came again, smooth, almost teasing. I see you've discovered my little project. Impressive, Caleb. I would have expected you to miss it entirely. Caleb's chest tightened. Little project? You call 9 years of sickness, confusion, and fear a little project? Daniel's laughter was low and restrained. 9 years? You exaggerate. I prefer to think of it as extended observation. Controlled variables. Fascinating results. Caleb's hands curled into fists. Controlled variables? People aren't variables, Daniel. I'm not a lab rat. And yet, Daniel replied lightly, you tolerated it remarkably well. Intelligent, careful, cautious. Exactly the subject I needed. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Subject? You did this deliberately. You exposed him, watched him deteriorate, and you call it observation. Daniel's tone shifted subtly, darker now. Words are meaningless. It's results that matter. You're here, alive, thinking, questioning. That is the reward. Caleb's mind spun, trying to reconcile the image of the man sitting across from him in that cafe with the calculated predator who had orchestrated his suffering for nearly a decade. The house, the containers, the notebooks, the chemicals, all pieces of a meticulously designed trap. And what now? Caleb asked. You've been caught. You've been exposed. What's your endgame? Daniel tilted his head slightly, considering. Endgame? There's no endgame. Not yet. This was never about revenge. Understanding. And testing. You, me, the world we live in. What people endure. How they react when the invisible hand is at work. Caleb's stomach twisted. You're insane. Perhaps, Daniel admitted. But perhaps brilliance and insanity are closer than you think. Look around, Caleb. I chose a place where I could control the environment, the variables, even the narrative. And yet, you've survived. Thrived in ways I didn't expect. That, in itself, is remarkable. Caleb exhaled, a mix of relief and anger flooding through him. So it's not just chemicals. You've been playing with my mind. Precisely, Daniel said, almost smiling. And now you know. You've uncovered everything. And that knowledge is what changes everything. Evelyn stepped forward, voice calm but firm. You won't get another chance. You're done manipulating him, Daniel. We'll call the authorities. We'll trace every container, every entry, every connection. You're finished. Daniel's smile faded. He leaned closer to the door, his tone colder now. You think you've seen everything? You think 9 years of careful planning can be undone by a single call to the police? No, Evelyn. You've just scratched the surface. There are pieces you don't understand. Things he doesn't understand. Caleb felt a shiver run down his spine. What things? Daniel's laugh returned, lighter this time. Patience, Caleb. Curiosity, and a few surprises that even you won't see coming. You're on the brink of discovery, yes, but only the first of many revelations. Some truths are better learned in steps. The basement door clicked. Daniel was gone. Evelyn looked at Caleb, worry written across her face. He left. For now. But he's not done. Not by a long shot. Caleb slumped against the wall, exhausted but alert. The weight of 9 years pressed down anew. His illness, the exposure, the manipulation, all now pieces of a puzzle that seemed to stretch further than he could comprehend. He looked at Evelyn. He's still inside this house somehow. Or someone like him. I can feel it. She nodded. We need to be careful. Every move, every step. And we need to prepare for the next phase. He's not going to stop until he's satisfied with whatever it is he wants. Caleb stared at the basement steps, now empty and silent, yet alive with the memory of Daniel's presence. A single thought dominated his mind. For 9 years he had survived the invisible enemy. But the real battle was just beginning. And this time Caleb knew he couldn't fight alone. The morning after Daniel's visit, Caleb woke to an unsettling quiet. The house felt still, almost too still. Normally, the subtle hum of activity, air vents, distant traffic, the soft creak of settling floors, was enough to anchor him. Today it was absent. Evelyn was already in the kitchen, notebook in hand, cataloging every remaining chemical sample that had been removed from the basement and sent to the lab. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled faintly with the residual metallic tang that seemed impossible to eliminate completely. Caleb poured himself a cup, trying to steady his racing thoughts. I keep replaying last night, he said quietly. Every word, every pause, every smirk. He's not like anyone I've ever met. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. She flipped through the notes again, methodical, precise. He's dangerous, she finally said. Not just physically or chemically. His control, his patience, the way he manipulates situations. He's calculating in a way that's almost surgical. Caleb nodded. And he's testing me. So, even after I've seen the basement, the containers, the notebooks, he's playing with me psychologically. Evelyn closed the notebook and looked at him. Exactly. And you need to understand that his game doesn't end in revelation. He escalates. That's the next stage. You've uncovered the first layer, but there are layers beneath it. Ones you haven't imagined yet. Caleb set down his coffee, the cup trembling slightly in his hands. I feel like I've been living in a shadow for 9 years. And now I see the shape of it. But it doesn't end there. It never ends. Evelyn's voice softened. It ends when you take control. That's the difference between victim and survivor. And right now we're gathering evidence, building leverage. You're not powerless. Not anymore. He exhaled, trying to let the words sink in. But fear lingered. The envelope, the basement, Daniel's message, it all formed a net around him, tightening with every realization. Caleb decided to take action. He returned to the study, where the folders and notebooks from the basement sat neatly stacked. He went through each page carefully, highlighting every note, cross-referencing dates with his own memory of symptoms. The pattern was undeniable. Daniel, or someone under his direction, had tracked him meticulously, noting every flare-up, every medical appointment, every day off work, every travel date. Hours passed. Caleb barely noticed the time slipping by. Evelyn checked on him occasionally, bringing water, offering brief encouragement. By late afternoon he had mapped out the timeline, the peaks, the troughs, the environmental triggers. The puzzle pieces formed a disturbing picture of deliberate, sustained psychological and physical manipulation. Then Caleb paused at one particular entry in the notebook, a date 6 months before his last major hospitalization. A note in the margin, asterisk exposure increment. Observe stress response, asterisk. He froze. Something clicked. That day his health had taken a sudden, inexplicable dive. He remembered the panic, the doctor's confusion, the feeling that his body was betraying him in real time. He had assumed it was a random flare-up, part of the mystery illness. But now he realized it had been orchestrated. Evelyn leaned over his shoulder. "You see it?" she said softly. "Yes," Caleb whispered. "He's been controlling not just my environment, my life, my body, my mind. Every detail, observed, measured." The room went silent. Caleb closed the notebook slowly, the realization settling in like a stone in his chest. Daniel hadn't just wanted to make him sick. He had wanted to dominate him. To prove something, maybe about himself, maybe about control. Evelyn put a hand on his arm. "We need to anticipate his next move. That's the only way to stay ahead." Caleb nodded, mind racing. "He knows I've seen everything. He knows I know his methods. He'll act. But he doesn't know what I've learned about him." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Caleb's lips curved into a faint, determined smile. "He underestimated me." Later that evening, as Caleb prepared to leave the study, a soft knock came at the front door. Security cameras caught a figure briefly, someone small, carrying a package, no badge. Caleb's heart skipped. Evelyn tensed. The package was left on the porch. No note. No explanation. Inside, Caleb found another set of documents. Photographs. Receipts. Envelopes stamped months ago and never sent. Among them, a single line written in familiar handwriting. Asterisk, "I'm not done, Caleb. Are you ready for what comes next?" Asterisk. Caleb felt a shiver run down his spine. Evelyn placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Looks like he's escalating," she said. "And this time, it's personal." Caleb stared at the documents. 9 years of manipulation. A hidden basement. Containers under his bed. Letters, keys, messages. And now he realized Daniel wasn't just testing him anymore. He was daring him. And Caleb knew he had to respond. But the question lingered, heavy and relentless. How do you fight someone who has already planned your life in advance? Caleb didn't answer Daniel's question out loud. He spent the night reading every document from the package, not skimming, not rushing. Receipts from specialty suppliers. Maintenance invoices signed under aliases. Photos of his own house taken from angles that made his stomach turn. Angles only someone inside the property could have captured. Dates lined up with his worst days. The days he'd almost given up. By dawn, something inside him had shifted. Fear was still there. But it was no longer steering. Evelyn noticed it immediately. "You've decided something," she said, watching him from across the table. "Yes," Caleb replied. His voice was steadier than it had been in weeks. "Daniel wants me reacting. Guessing. Chasing shadows. I'm done doing that." She studied him carefully. "What's your plan?" "I stop playing defense," he said. "I make him move first, but on my terms." That afternoon, Caleb did something Evelyn hadn't expected. He reopened the guest wing. The unused rooms. The hall Daniel had once treated like his own during the renovations. Caleb walked through them slowly, deliberately, as if reclaiming territory. He removed old furniture. Pulled down curtains. Exposed every corner to light. "Why here?" Evelyn asked. Because this is where he felt safest, Caleb said. And people like him always return to places they believe they still control. They installed discreet cameras. Not hidden in obvious places, but where Daniel would never bother checking. Caleb insisted on choosing the locations himself. He remembered Daniel's habits. His blind spots. That evening, Caleb sent a single email. No accusation. No anger. Just one sentence. If you want closure, you know where to find me. He didn't wait for a response. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, close to midnight, the security system chimed softly. Motion detected. Evelyn's eyes snapped to the monitor. Someone was in the house. They moved silently, watching the feed. The figure entered through a service door, access code used correctly, confidently. Daniel didn't rush. He never rushed. He walked like someone entering his own property. He's alone, Evelyn whispered. Caleb felt his pulse quicken, but not with panic. With focus. Daniel moved toward the guest wing. Exactly as Caleb predicted. When Daniel stepped into the cleared room, the lights came on automatically. He froze. Cameras caught the moment his comm cracked, just slightly. Clever, Daniel said aloud, knowing he was being watched. Very clever. Caleb stepped into the doorway. No chemicals, Caleb said. No notes. No games. Just us. Daniel turned slowly, smiled. You look better. I am, Caleb replied. Turns out removing poison helps. Daniel's eyes flicked around the room. You think this ends because you caught me trespassing? No, Caleb said. It ends because you underestimated what 9 years of surviving does to a person. Daniel chuckled. Surviving isn't winning. Caleb stepped closer. It is when the person who caused the damage needs secrecy to function. Daniel's smile faded. You won't expose me. You're too careful. Too controlled. You want proof. Process. Caleb nodded. You're right. Daniel relaxed slightly. And while you're waiting, Daniel continued, I'll keep reminding you how fragile control really is. That's when Evelyn spoke from the hallway. The proof is already secured. Daniel's head snapped toward her. She held up a tablet. Live feeds. Logs. Access records. Maintenance schedules. Cross-referenced with Daniel's financial trail. Every return visit. Every adjustment. Every manipulation. Daniel's jaw tightened. You didn't just plan my illness, Caleb said quietly. You documented your own crimes. Daniel stared at the screen longer than necessary. When he looked up again, his eyes were cold. You won't get satisfaction, he said. Not the way you think. Caleb shook his head. This isn't about satisfaction. He gestured toward the cameras. It's about ending your control. Sirens sounded in the distance. Faint but unmistakable. Daniel laughed once, sharp and humorless. You think that changes who you are now? After everything I did? Caleb met his gaze. No. It changes who you are. Daniel's smile disappeared completely. As officers entered the house, Daniel stepped back, hands slowly rising, not in surrender but calculation. Even now he was measuring outcomes. As they led him away, he turned once more toward Caleb. This doesn't erase the past, Daniel said softly. Caleb nodded. No. But it stops you from writing the future. The door closed behind them. Silence filled the house. Caleb stood still, listening, not for footsteps this time, but for his own breath. Steady. Clear. For the first time in 9 years, nothing felt hidden. But as Evelyn touched his arm gently, a final thought settled in his mind, quiet, unsettling, honest. Healing wouldn't be instant. Freedom wouldn't be simple. And the damage Daniel caused wouldn't vanish with handcuffs. This was an ending. But it was also a beginning. The house was quiet in a way Caleb hadn't experienced in nearly a decade. The tension that had always lurked in corners, under floors, behind doors, seemed to lift slightly, though not completely. He walked through the room slowly, pausing in each space, letting himself notice things he had ignored for years. The soft hum of the HVAC, the filtered sunlight through the windows, the faint scent of polished wood. Evelyn followed him, carrying the final folders from their basement investigation. "It's over," she said quietly. "Daniel's gone, the authorities have the evidence, and your exposure has been neutralized." Caleb nodded, but his gaze lingered on the basement stairs. "Over?" he repeated. "Yes, but not forgotten." They moved to the study, where Caleb finally sat down and opened a journal he hadn't touched in years. A private record of symptoms, thoughts, and fears he had never shared. The pages were yellowed in parts, but the writing was precise, sometimes frantic. It told the story of a man slowly unraveling, of fear and confusion, of days when he had almost given up. Evelyn sat nearby, silent. She didn't interrupt. She let him confront the years on his own terms. Caleb's hands shook slightly as he read a passage from 5 years ago. I woke up feeling hollow. No energy. Doctors shrugging. I can't explain it. Maybe I'm losing my mind. Maybe I'm dying. He exhaled, a mixture of sadness and relief washing over him. I remember that day, he whispered. I felt invisible, trapped inside my own body. You weren't invisible, Evelyn said softly. You just hadn't found the truth yet. Caleb closed the journal and leaned back. It's strange. Now that it's over, I almost feel lighter. But there's a hollowness too. 9 years of manipulation, fear, and illness doesn't just disappear overnight. It leaves traces. Evelyn nodded. It does. And that's why healing takes time. Not just the body, but the mind. You'll need to reclaim every part of yourself. Emotionally, physically, mentally. Caleb stood and walked toward the living room. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, dust motes dancing in the light. He let himself take a deep breath, filling his lungs fully for the first time in months. I thought, he said, turning to Evelyn, that if I solved the mystery, I'd feel victorious. But victory isn't what I feel. Relief maybe. Clarity definitely. But also, a need to rebuild. You're allowed to feel that, Evelyn replied. Rebuilding doesn't happen in a day and it won't be perfect. But it will be yours. Caleb looked around the house, his sanctuary, his prison, his battleground. I have to reclaim this place. Every corner. Every memory. Every part of it that wasn't contaminated by fear. Step by step, Evelyn said. You'll reclaim it. A few weeks later, Caleb started small. Cleaning closets he hadn't entered in years. Repainting walls that had absorbed too many memories. Reorganizing his study not just for order but for ownership. Every action was deliberate, each movement a quiet declaration. I am back. One evening, as he sorted through old photos, Caleb found one he had long avoided, a family portrait from before the chaos began. He stared at the faces, the younger him, his parents, a brother he hadn't spoken to in years. The memory of laughter, simple family dinners, careless weekends. The warmth of life before manipulation had invaded. He smiled faintly, a soft but real expression. I'll get back to this, he said quietly. All of it, piece by piece. Evelyn watched him, satisfied yet cautious. And you will. Just remember, he's gone, but the lessons remain. Let them guide you, not haunt you. Caleb nodded. I will. I can feel it, a shift. I'm not the same man who woke up thinking he was broken. I'm stronger, wiser, and more aware. That night, Caleb stepped onto the balcony overlooking the city. The skyline glowed, lights sparkling like distant stars. He inhaled the cool night air, feeling alive in a way he hadn't in years. And though the shadows of the past lingered, he realized something important. Shadows exist only where there is light to contrast them. For the first time in nearly a decade, Caleb felt the balance returning. Not complete, not perfect, but enough. Enough to take the next step, enough to face the future, and enough to finally believe he could heal. Below, the city hummed with life. And above, Caleb allowed himself to hope. For the first time in 9 years, he wasn't running from someone else's control. He was moving toward his own freedom. But deep down he knew something subtle had changed inside him. An alertness, a wariness, that would never fully leave. The past had taught him vigilance, and vigilance now felt like a gift, not a curse. He smiled faintly, letting the night settle over him. The darkness was no longer threatening. It was simply waiting, like everything else, for him to move forward. And Caleb was ready. Weeks passed, and life slowly began to feel normal again. Normal at least in the sense that Caleb could leave his house without scanning every corner, sleep without checking under his bed, and drink coffee without wondering if someone had tampered with it. Yet, even as the physical danger of Daniel's intrusion receded, Caleb realized that the emotional scars ran deeper than any chemical exposure ever could. Every time he walked through the house, shadows of the past lingered, memories of footsteps where there shouldn't have been, whispers of notes he had never seen, chemicals stored like time bombs. Evelyn remained by his side, meticulous as ever. Together they reviewed every detail of the investigation one last time, making sure no evidence was left unchecked, no detail overlooked. Caleb felt a mix of gratitude and exhaustion, grateful for her unwavering support, exhausted from the constant vigilance that had defined the last 9 years. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Caleb received a call from his doctor. Routine blood work. Results had come back. Nothing abnormal. No lingering toxins, no markers of long-term exposure. It was a relief, yes, but Caleb felt something more profound. Validation. Proof that the invisible war he had endured had finally ended. That night, he sat in the living room, flipping through the journals he had kept. His own handwriting stared back at him, documenting the deterioration of his body and mind, the relentless confusion that no doctor could diagnose. He paused at a page from 3 years ago. I don't know if I'm imagining things. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. Caleb exhaled slowly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He had imagined things, yes, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality he had faced. He had survived what no one else even knew existed. And now he could finally look forward. As he closed the journal, his phone buzzed. A text message this time. No numbers saved. No introduction. You're stronger than you know. Keep living. Caleb stared at it. His pulse quickened, not with fear but recognition. Daniel? No. This didn't carry the same cold, calculated tone. There was no threat, no edge, no challenge. Evelyn glanced over. Message from who? Caleb shook his head. I don't think it's from him. I think it's from someone who's been watching me survive and wants me to remember why I fought. For the first time in years, Caleb felt unburdened. He walked to the balcony, letting the night air brush against his face. The city below sparkled, indifferent yet alive, as if celebrating his resilience. He thought of the years he had spent in fear, the doctor's puzzled expressions, the chemicals, the letters, the basement, and Daniel's obsession. And he realized that none of it had defeated him. Weeks turned into months. Caleb slowly reclaimed control over his life, returning to work at a measured pace, reconnecting with old friends and cautiously exploring the world beyond the walls of his home. The house, once a cage, became a sanctuary again. He cleared out the final remnants of Daniel's manipulations, taking care to leave no trace behind. Each removed object, each cleaned surface, was a small victory, a step toward reclaiming his life. One afternoon, Evelyn suggested something unexpected. You've survived the impossible, she said. Maybe it's time to help others who are trapped in invisible battles of their own. Caleb considered it. He thought of the countless people who had suffered from unexplained illnesses, toxic work environments, or manipulations they couldn't name. He thought of how isolated he had felt, how powerless. And he realized that sharing his story could give someone else hope. He nodded. I think you're right. It's time to turn what happened into something meaningful. Not just for me, but for anyone who feels invisible, unheard, or trapped. Evelyn smiled faintly. Then let's start planning. Slowly. Carefully. Like everything else you've survived. That evening, as Caleb prepared for bed, he noticed a small detail that would have gone unnoticed before. A framed photo of him and Daniel, taken years ago, left in the guest wing. He looked at it, the man's smile frozen in time. And Caleb smiled back, quietly, almost softly. He whispered to the empty room, "You can't touch me anymore. Not my mind. Not my body. Not my life." The house felt lighter, the air less dense, the walls less menacing. Shadows still existed, of course, but they no longer held power over him. And as Caleb drifted to sleep, he felt something he hadn't in 9 years, the possibility of true peace. For the first time, he was no longer surviving. He was living. And outside, the city hummed on, indifferent yet welcoming, a world waiting for him to reclaim it fully. The morning sun poured through the tall windows, golden and unhurried, painting the living room in warmth Caleb hadn't noticed in years. The house, once a battlefield, a prison, a laboratory of manipulation, now felt like a home again. Every corner, every room, every shadow carried memory, yes, but it no longer carried fear. Caleb moved slowly through the space, drinking in the quiet. The basement had been secured, cleaned, and catalogued. Every container, every vial, every notebook had been handed over to authorities. Every trace of Daniel's obsession had been neutralized. Yet Caleb knew that healing wasn't about erasing the past, it was about reclaiming it piece by piece. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea. "You've come a long way," she said softly. Caleb smiled faintly. "More than I ever imagined. I survived what no doctor could diagnose, what no one could explain, what no one even knew existed. And yet, I'm here." Evelyn nodded. "And now it's time to live, not just survive." He walked to the balcony, the city sprawled beneath him, vibrant, alive, full of stories that went on without pause. He thought of Daniel, of the years lost to manipulation, the symptoms, the unanswered questions. And he realized something profound. Those years had changed him, yes, but they had not broken him. They had taught him vigilance, resilience, and the value of reclaiming control over his life. A soft buzz from his phone drew his attention. A notification, an email from an organization that helped victims of medical and psychological manipulation. They had read about his story and wanted him to share his experience, to speak, to guide, to help others who might be living under invisible threats. Caleb stared at the screen, a quiet clarity settling over him. For 9 years, he had been trapped in fear, confusion, and isolation. Now he had a choice, to let those years define him or to transform them into a force for good. He turned to Evelyn. "I think it's time," he said. "Time to tell the story. Time to help others who might be facing what I went through." Evelyn smiled. "And you'll do it carefully, thoughtfully, like everything else you've faced." Caleb nodded. The weight of the past felt different now, acknowledged, honored, but no longer oppressive. He could look back without fear. He could look forward without hesitation. Later that evening, he stood in the guest wing, the room where Daniel had once thought he was in control. The walls were clear, the furniture arranged, the space bright and neutral. Caleb let himself take a deep breath. The room no longer felt like a trap. It felt like reclaimed territory. He remembered the envelope under the bed, the hidden basement, the letters, the chemicals, and the calculated presence that had haunted him for nearly a decade. And yet, none of it could touch him now, because he had survived. He had endured. He had reclaimed his life. And as the city lights flickered on, one by one, outside his window, Caleb allowed himself a quiet, unhurried smile. The story wasn't over, not entirely, but it was his story now. Written in his terms. Grounded in truth, lived experience, and the knowledge that even the deepest shadows could be met with clarity and strength. He whispered to himself, softly but firmly, 9 years and I'm still here. Stronger. Free. Ready. The night settled around him. The house exhaled with him. The world outside waited, vivid, unpredictable, alive. And Caleb finally stepped into it, fully, with the quiet certainty that he would never let anyone take that control from him again. For the first time in nearly a decade, he was not just surviving. He was alive. Fully. Completely. And no one, not even Daniel, could change that. He turned back to the city one last time, letting the lights reflect in his eyes, and whispered, "This is my life. And it begins now."